Yo guys, I've got a spark which I'm going to use to ignite the fire for a double intro right here. Not only is this the intro to a stream like the one you see right before you, but it's also an intro to my 1.5 thousand subscriber special. That's all because whilst I'm streaming without a face cam, you can see the glorious Sly Cooper icon in the top right. And I want to start my 1.5 subscriber special talking about the legendary gaming character and how the franchise he's from has impacted me. So let's roll the intro and start talking about it. Rightio then, let's talk about Sly Cooper. My first ever video game console was for PlayStation 2. I specifically remember the game Sly Raccoon, as it's called here in Europe. This game right here is not only a PlayStation 2 classic, but it's also the first video game I ever played. That's right, my dad might have bought me multiple PlayStation 2 games to try out, but from all of them, this was the cover which I wound up wanting to play the most, or at least play it first above all the others, because hey, the cover to this game was pretty glorious. As I was very young at the time and terrible at video games, but I could still tell an awesome little cartoon raccoon even that was going and sneaking around was gonna make for a fun time. And hey, I thoroughly enjoyed the game all the same, despite the terribleness I was at it, as I previously alluded to. That's what gives me such a strong connection to this game, and by extent the entirety of the Sly Cooper franchise. Going back and replaying these games always puts a smile on my face as I'm reminded of my childhood and how much I enjoyed playing these games for the first time. My more specific memories involve escaping the swamp monster in the voodoo jungle portion of the game, or just how intimidating Clockwork was to me as a child. A metal owl with glowing eyes is perfect final boss material, and during this section of the game there are such varieties. You go from shooting to driving to sneaking to flying and even platforming, constantly switching between these here different genres to make the gameplay loop feel fresh. And overall it was fast paced and also difficult, so that's what made it just such a thrill, a marathon. You can even go as far to say, and as a kid I sure did die a lot during this final confrontation, but I was so happy to continue to play and continue having all this fun. It made for the final moments where I defeated this boss all the more gratifying. Now the game also had a killer soundtrack, which you can hear in the background so long as I'm not copyrighted for using it. Case in point, I fell in love so much with my first ever video game that I continued playing video games without this game successfully shaping me into the driven and passionate gamer I am today. Well, who's to say what I would have became without it? And it's what allows me to just have such a raw sense of nostalgia when looking back at this game, and again by extent the entirety of the franchise, especially since the third Sly Cooper game, entitled Honor Amongst Thieves, is one of my favourite games of all time. That game is just such an absolute banger. Man, I can't believe I just said banger. Keeping with the video game theme, Last of Us Part 2 has officially passed its first year anniversary, and I must say, I still love the game. Sure, it makes some very obvious missteps and it's heavily flawed, especially with the pacing of the story and its importance placed upon gender politics rather than continuing to build upon our layered and fascinating characters that we fell in love with during the course of the first game. Joel, for example, was killed off far too swiftly. I wanted to see his bond with Ellie grow, as that's what really made the first game as compelling as it was, especially to me, and losing that just 2 hours into the game is devastating. Even with a weak and cliche revenge plot, the game still raises great emotions. It's devastating watching Ellie not finding fulfillment in her revenge. After she kills Nora, she doesn't feel anything, leading to her ending ending for Chain of Revenge even, at the game's climax. I'd have preferred for Choice to either kill Abby or spare her, and I hate having to play as her for 10 hours straight, but Ellie needed to end that loop of revenge, otherwise Lev would revenge Abby, and then others would revenge Ellie, and all of a sudden a never-ending loop is created. But on top of all this, the game is stunning. Animations are so fleshed out and lifelike. The sound design is incredibly crisp. At moments I would wind up forgetting that I was even playing a game, as I became just so heavily invested in the beauty of this world. Going back to Joel, however, his actor goes by the name of Troy Baker, the same voice actor as Sunburn, linking both Last of Us 2 and Scars together. Recently, I've seen Black Widow in theatres. It's a perfectly good and entertaining spy thriller with excellent production design and large-scale action sequences that definitely help even with the film's craft, and it just overall makes it a rather fast-paced watch. I hated, on the other hand, how much they wasted Taskmaster's character. Such an awesome comic book villain was demoted to nothing other than a henchman, and it's beyond disappointing. To make the female characters look strong, they needed to dumb down and make all the men look stupid, rather than make the women more strong and capable by their own merits. Just like Last of Us Part 2, this flaw was created by the need to appease gender politics in today's checklist filmmakers and game developers need to abide by. It's basically a non-written law at this point. To continue creating links between Black Widow, Last of Us 2 and Scarlett, it would turn out that Scarlett and Black Widow share the same composer, that being Lorne Balfe, which explains why the music in Black Widow is as good as it is. Overall though, the film was mediocre, especially in comparison to the rest of the MCU, as it sits at around number 16 on my ranking of all of them. For those of you who are new to the channel, I'm a SkyTuber, meaning I primarily pump out Scarlett's content. So what kind of SkyTuber would I be if I didn't talk about Scarlett for my 1.5 thousand subscriber celebration? So, as you can tell, I've boosted up my favourite game within the franchise, alongside my favourite Scarlett, and I've even inverted the colours, because there's only one thing that makes Igknight look even more glorious than it is already, and that's the colour and the version that you can see before you. Now, all of this in combination is absolute true bliss. A bit like chocolate, really.
Give the gift of bliss.
Dang it, now I really want some chocolate. But getting back on track with Scarlett here, what makes Trap Team such a great game is its excellent level design. Each theme is unique and varies up the gameplay so the pacing is constantly moving forward, and overall I just have so much raw fun with the difficulty and creativity being pumped into every element of every level and boss fight. It's truly inspiring to me, the passion and dedication that went into producing this game, mind you. And as for Ignitor, you leave yourself vulnerable when controlling your fire spirit, but in this form you don't only deal damage to the enemies with the fire spirit itself, but you also leave them engulfed in your blue flame. This entrapment defeats enemies swiftly, and if that doesn't do so, I can assure you that the ease and maneuverability, as you can walk around with a slam that will deal 80 damage upon impact, will certainly finish off any of the targets that you acquire within your sights, mind you. Enemies don't stand a chance. Now, the animations for his combos are fluent and allow his entire moveset to organically flow in a fast-paced manner. Ignitor has a really detailed design, and it puts emphasis on his honourable personality as he historically recreates the heroicness and valour of knights in medieval times. He's also intimidating because he looks victorious before you've even placed one to the portal, so that makes him a character that you really want to play as. So in other words, Ignitor is the perfect Skarner. But I end off this Scarlett portion of the video with some interesting pieces of trivia about Ignitor. Ignitor was actually called Ignatius before he was cursed. Common knowledge for anyone who would have read Ignitor's backstory, mind you. Anyway, moving on to the next piece of trivia, it is unknown what species Ignitor was before he turned into a fire spirit, but judging by his stocky frame, accent and strength, it's possible that he could have been a dwarf. Now, for the next piece of trivia, on the Wii version of Giants, there is a glitch where Ignitor's flame-formed water goes extremely high into the air sometimes. This normally happens when you are under a ledge. Now, the next piece of trivia is all about Ignitor's catchphrase. You see, his catchphrase is a play on Crash and Burn, which is also Phino's official catchphrase. So therefore, his catchphrase, Slash and Burn, is also a technique that involves the cutting and burning of plants in forests or woodlands to create fields. So in other words, Ignitor's catchphrase has so many multiple meanings. It's what makes Ignitor so unbelievably clever, especially from a writing standpoint. But our next piece of trivia does not look at writing. Instead, we look at who Ignitor was voiced by, because he was voiced by Dwight Schultz. My apologies if I horribly botched that pronunciation right now. But he did additional voices in Spyro's Adventure and is also known for his role of Howlin' Mad Murdoch from the A-Team TV series, as well as voicing the character Mung Dahl in the animated television series Chowder, and villain Aloysius Nemo in the animated television series Ben 10. Now moving on to our next piece of trivia, in Spyro's Adventure, Ignitor is the only Fire Skylander who doesn't have an evil counterpart in boss battles. For our next piece of trivia, according to the Book of Elements, Fire and Water, fun fact about that title, I actually own it, but regardless, Ignitor asked his fellow Skylanders for help removing the cursed armour. Nevertheless, their methods had no effect on the armour, and he stopped trying once his mother complimented him all the same during a visit. Wow, what a legendary mother Ignitor must have right now, she truly is supportive. With that being said, our next piece of trivia is revolving around the fact that Ignitor is the only Starter Pack Skylander who did not return in Skylander Swap Force along with T-Rex. Additionally, he is the only Skylander from the Starter Pack of Spyro's Adventure and Giants without a sidekick or mini along with Cinder. Now, our next piece of trivia talks about the resemblance that Ignitor bears with Crypt King. Of course, they both wear armor, both have swords as their primary weapons, and both were knights in their past lives. Now, our next piece of trivia, for line Sword and Scorchery, turns out that is a play on the popular fantasy media subgenre Sword and Sorcery. Yeah, again, that just goes to show how much writing went into Ignitor's one-liners, mind you, and I kind of got took off topic there when my phone battery started draining below 15%. With that being said, he is the only Skylander whose name starts with an I. Very interesting piece of trivia, that one. Now, the next piece of trivia involves around the fact that Ignitor's true fire form and ability to move out of his suit are similar to the NRG transformation from the Ben 10 series. In fact, this clearly has Ben 10 similarities written all over it, considering that the voice actor also worked for that same series. Either way, our final piece of trivia, his mouthpiece, quote-unquote, appears blue in the first two games, all 3DS games, and in his Series 2 toy and artwork, whereas in the Swap Force onwards, Superchargers Racing and his Series 1 toy and artwork, it shows his mouthpiece to be fully silver-coloured. I talked about movies earlier, so let's look at something I love, but with movies from it that I hate. I'm talking about Transformers, of course. With the exception of Bumblebee, these movies are annoying, offensive, dragged out pieces of flaming trash, possessing absolutely nothing of value besides its action choreography and visual effects. Well, I suppose its music is also great too. But I hate, most of all, how they took iconic characters such as Bumblebee, Ironhide, and Jazz, ripped them apart like they're nothing but empty pieces of metal.
Got Megatron, come here, cretin. You want a piece of me? You want a piece? No! I want two!
And used them to create such juvenile humour. Casual audiences, when you bring up Transformers, will think of these terrible movies and of their objectification of women, as well as stories that are so poorly executed that there is no beginning, middle, and end.
Beginning, middle, end. Facts, details, condense, plot, tell it.
Ironic that. Luckily for me, Bumblebee exists. They took a director who knows how to direct and write action and character, and someone who really cares about the source material. Travis Knight did a great job making Bumblebee feel heartfelt with charming characters that have emotionally investing character arcs. Previous works of Travis Knight involved Kubo and the Two Strings, which is just such an excellently crafted film, which is why I praise him as one of my favourite directors working today. And with Bumblebee, it's another excellent exception of what Travis Knight can do right. I mean, on top of all of this, the action was still fast-paced and well choreographed, and because we actually cared about the characters this time around, the action got quite intense at moments. I love this movie. But I also love the How to Train Your Dragon movies. All the films within this trilogy are absolute masterpieces and hidden gems that build upon the last to create characters that are really fleshed out with heartwarming relationships that are incredibly expressive. I mean, Toothless of all is, for one, brimming with the most personality, and it's all shown through body language too, which is risky for a kids film, but it's such a fantastic payoff. So yes, I called these films hidden gems earlier because not many people appreciate these films for the masterpieces that they are. They certainly aren't flawless, but they are phenomenal animated films that if you haven't done so already, you should absolutely go and watch. You will be doing yourself a favour, and you can thank me later. But with that being said, the emotional arc this trilogy goes through and its organic character development is something that you can truly relate to. It's what makes the How to Train Your Dragon trilogy my favourite trilogy of all time, let alone my favourite animated film trilogy. Plus, its soundtrack is amazing. First Flight is a scene that gives me goosebumps every time, thanks to its incredible soundtrack really adding to the atmosphere and the excitement that you're seeing, thanks to the sheer amount of detail put into the animation and the visuals before you. So this pair between, of course, how wonderful the CGI is and the beauty of this world in combination with the music and how atmospheric and eerie it can get is what truly makes How to Train Your Dragon exceptional. There are plenty of awesome dragon designs in the How to Train Your Dragon series. I mean, dragons are a major part of the title, for Pete's sake, but you know what else has awesome dragon designs in it? Skarnders. That's right, when I said...
But I end off this Skarnders portion of the video with some interesting pieces of trivia about Igknight.
I was lying. Now, a few designs of dragons between the two franchises which have similarities would include characters like Camo and the Terrible Terrors, for example, which have similar colours and proportions as one another. Then there's also Cinder and the Skrill, again with similar colours as well as similar abilities, with both of them having control over the lightning. Now, Blades and Razor Whips share armour that is incredibly sharp and accurate when it comes to slicing and chopping up their enemies, mind you. Drobot and Armor Wings are both resourceful creatures as they build their armours out of scraps of metal, which really gives me Iron Man vibes to tie this video back to the MCU.
Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps.
The final comparison I want to make is with Echo and the Sea Shocker. Now, whilst Echo doesn't have two heads, which would have been incredibly awesome, and she certainly is lacking any wings as well, but the aquatic scales and overall aesthetics are indeed very similar, and there's no use in denying that. The dragon boss fight in God of War is awesome. In fact, everything in God of War is awesome, period. The gameplay somehow manages to be both a repeat of combat systems we've seen before, as well as some of the most innovative gameplay we've ever seen. Just look at the beauty in this world, but more importantly, things get really intense, especially during boss fights, where the pacing is at its fastest, and you remain invested in the gameplay as it demands strategy, fast reaction times, and concentration. Of course, keeping us invested in the gameplay is incredibly important as the story develops and tells itself through said gameplay. So I love this combat, it's so much fun. Not nearly as fun, however, as the world and the characters that inhabit it. The bond between Kratos and Atreus is so compelling. The music leaves you with goosebumps, and it creates eeriness and dread to build an atmosphere that further increases your investment as well as your sense of time. So in other words, it makes the pacing of the game even faster. I can't really fault this game. I've just alluded the surface level details that make this game as good as it is. The gameplay giving you a reason to want to traverse such a beautiful and well written world with compelling characters that you really care about to make the gameplay all the more intense because you don't want to see these characters hurt. And of course, on top of it all, the Dragon Boss certainly doesn't hurt how much I love it, nor does the twist at the end of the game, which pleasantly takes me off guard and makes me very excited for the sequel coming up next year. Anyways, I've talked about everything I wanted to talk about within this 1.5 subscriber special. It's such an honour for me to have so many of you that constantly tune in and support the channel. It's truly humbling that you choose to spend your precious time with me. I can't even begin to thank you with mere words. My appreciation is beyond all that. So from the bottom of my heart, I thank each and every one of you. I have the greatest 1.5 thousand subscribers any YouTube channel could possibly have ever asked for. Now, with that all being said and done, this video is coming to an end, but before that happens, I first want to thank all my Blazing Knights and Scorpion Dragons whose support allow me to continue pumping out quality videos like this one. Without them, this all wouldn't be possible. Therefore, I genuinely appreciate every last one of you from the bottom of my heart. If you enjoyed this video, I have others you can watch by clicking on screen now, and you can even subscribe by pressing the button on the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll be seeing you in the next one, but until that moment arises, peace!